Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to be here. Thank you for taking the time to be a part of what Judy and I consider to be a really important conversation as we get into what I think is going to be a really exciting component in addition to what crisis communication can look like. A couple of housekeeping things as we get started. The Q&A section will be open, so if you have questions as we're talking about things, please feel free to drop your questions in. We're going to have time at the end where we'll go through those questions. We've left a pretty significant amount of time to be able to do that because we want people to not only ask questions to get the answers that they need, but there's a really good chance that if you're asking a question, somebody else is thinking the same thing, and it's a great way to get information out to people. The other housekeeping piece of our session is we will be sending out a survey at the end of this. It's a very quick, no more than 2 minutes to see how you liked the experience here. Your participation in those surveys help us to make these webinar experiences better. We plan on doing more of these, so your feedback would be greatly appreciated. So with that, I'm going to dive right in. A little bit of information about Connection Point. We, as the bullet says, I love this line, we're a battle-tested team of communicators and marketers. Connection Point is a full-service communications company, marketing and comms. Judy and I obviously do a tremendous amount of crisis work, which is what leads us to have the opportunity to travel around the country and do presentations together and to work with everyone from nonprofit and government organizations to NGOs and everything in between. For those of you who don't know Judy and I a little bit about our backgrounds, I started my professional law enforcement career with the Baltimore Police Department, rose pretty quickly through the ranks there. My last assignment, I was the director of communications during the Freddie Gray riots. I've done a bunch of stuff in the now 11 years since I left the BPD, and it is my great privilege and honor to introduce somebody who very likely needs no introduction because she is the gold standard of national crisis communications and a dear friend and mentor to me. And so with that, Judy, the floor is yours.
Well, that's very kind. Thank you, Eric. We are the Mutual Admiration Society for sure. I'm just the older version of Eric, and I'm just blessed to have worked with extraordinary police leaders, and unfortunately gone through a ton of crisis. So, what Eric and I talk a lot about here is what we've learned through scar tissue, the mistakes that we've made, and that we hope that our colleagues and those that are participating in webinars such as these don't make the same mistakes because they can learn from each other. And we always learn from each other. Even with these webinars, we learn from you. So thanks for participating. We appreciate y'all being here today.
Absolutely. So with that, let's get into it a little bit, Judy. Um, one of the things that I think you and I are particularly known for everywhere we go is talking about how important it is to get communication out quickly. That in a crisis, managing that narrative, making sure that you become the trusted source of news and information, telling people what they need to know, telling people what they need to be doing for their safety, for the assisting of emergency services, whatever it is, that messaging needs to happen really, really quickly. And in looking at, for decades, you've been saying that for 11 years. I've been saying that as we teach classes around the country. And what's emerged in those conversations is this understanding that people know that they need to speak quickly, but how do they speak quickly? And then are they actually ready to be able to speak quickly? Do they have the right preparation in place? Is the organization trained and prepared? Those are the things that led into this idea of this 10-minute crisis test, this idea that there is a very easy to follow rubric that you can put someone through to figure out, hey, are you really ready to be able to talk about a crisis situation? Because across the country, we're seeing the same breakdown in the first 10 minutes of a crisis. And it really comes down to this like delay, confusion, and then the dreaded silence.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of that has we have to understand that the public is operating in real time when that thing is happening. But most governments, however, are still operating in that process time. And that is where the gap in trust is lost. And trust is key.
I mean, you talk about trust being key. You've seen this play out, this loss of trust at some of the highest levels. Does this idea of uh, confusion, delay, silence, does that match with the with what you've experienced?
Absolutely. And over time and over the years that I've worked, in every single major incident I've been part of, the communication breakdown actually wasn't surprising once you get in and you see that it's very, very predictable as we go along. We talk about the stages of a crisis. And when you know these predictable stages of a crisis, you can plan for the communication.
Yeah, you and I have had the opportunity over the last year to work with agencies in the middle of the country, on the eastern seaboard, a couple in California. And what we're noticing is that this isn't an isolated issue. It's a systemic issue across public safety organizations, across municipal organizations. And for me, I think there are a couple of reasons why this takes place, but I think it starts with this idea that whatever it is, it won't happen here. I mean, the number of times that we've heard, well, that'll never happen. For me, that sits at the basis of this driver of where this comes from. I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure you share the same idea.
Yeah. Well, and every PIO who's on this knows that point when someone walks into their office or someone calls them or someone sends a text going, take a look at this. Or this is just breaking. Or you as the PIO are the last person to know when someone said, when something pops up on social media or you get that call from that reporter saying, what do you know about this? And it is a shock. And I think one of the biggest concerns, and I think one of the biggest fallacies that a lot of government agencies have is, well, we've done this one before, so we know how to handle all of them. And that is such a dangerous paradigm to have.
Yeah, the two sit in such it's almost like a symbiotic relationship between the idea that that won't happen here, and if it does, we've done this other thing, and we're really good at this other thing, so we'll be really good at this thing. And getting through to people, to particularly leaders, and I know for all the PIOs that are here, they've probably slammed their head into the wall repeatedly out of frustration of like, why aren't they listening to me? That um, it won't happen here has to be changed to it will happen here. And every single situation is different. Audiences are different. Impact of the situation, there's a word I know you love me to use. Impact of the situation is different. The long tail effects of a situation are different. So just because you handled the tornado really well doesn't mean that you're going to handle the train derailment or the school shooting or the massive corruption scandal that takes place inside your organization well.
Yeah, I think those are the two big ones, and then the last one is the one that every person in communication knows is that we spend our time chasing the dumpsters that are on fire rolling by, and then a squirrel runs by the other way, and then this is happening, and then we're called to take action on all these output items that people want, and we just don't have the time to do the planning for it. And I think that's one of the biggest concerns and one of the biggest frustrations that I hear not only from bosses and PIOs, but like throughout organizations, throughout government agencies, is we don't have the time prepared for this. But you need to have the time to prepare for this. And one of the basic parts of that is really understanding, who's going to be responsible for what as we go through this crisis.
Yeah, the as you were talking, the quote running through my head of if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. And right, that's the situation that you're describing, and we've all been there. Today is the day that I'm going to do this thing, and then the phone rings, and it's the random reporter calling about something.
Yeah.
The reality is, and you have to intentionally just say, I don't care. That can wait. This has to be a priority. And part of making it a priority, to your point, is getting the bosses, getting the people with the decision-making authority to buy onto that and to see the vision that you're putting out there. Because without that decision-making authority behind you, it's really hard to pull everybody with you. And the ramifications of not having that decision-making authority can be severe.
Yeah, and here's the thing, when it comes to communications, we've got to be talking about the three M's. And I think people so focus on what the messenger, the message is, they forget about the two other really important ones. Who's going to be your messenger and what method are you going to use to convey your method? If you don't decide, if you don't make pre-thought out intentional decisions of who speaks before a crisis, the crisis is going to decide that for you, and you may not be happy with the results.
Yeah, and when that happens, you don't just lose time, right? And we're talking about time here, but you lose control of the narrative. And we talk about the fact that you can't control the narrative. You can try to manage the narrative, but you can absolutely lose control of the narrative and let other people set the stage and let other people dictate what the terms are. And the second that happens, you're not leading anymore. You're now reacting. You're now responding to what's out there. And that happens in so many situations and so many crises across like just in recent memory, within the last couple of months, we've seen school shootings where that happened in real time. The delay in being able to speak led to just this intense level of scrutiny, which you talk about all the time as one of the phases of the crisis and one of the most challenging phases that you'll be in a crisis.
And if we haven't decided, one, I mean, basic things, if we haven't decided on, approval processes and stuff, which we'll get to, and if we haven't decided who the best person is to speak on that, I think we have to look at and be very aware of folks that are affected by the crisis and who's going to be the best person to convey those messages that are victim centric, that hold the most important stakeholders top of mind when they're speaking. And we've all seen the examples of CEOs and others who were not well trained, who get out there and either say stupid things, do stupid things, or just, completely obliterate any opportunity for to rebuild trust because of their inability to show compassion. So all of that becomes extraordinarily important.
When you talk about the leaders themselves getting out there and scrambling and I'm smiling because I'm thinking about conversations where I've had with some of these leaders when it's a day late and a dollar short. And they say, well, I couldn't have possibly been prepared for this, or there was no way to know that this was coming. And the thought that runs through my head, and we talk about this in training, is that as the leader of an organization, you have to be ready. And we've trained leaders across the country to not only be prepared in advance, but in the midst of the crisis that are under the pressure. And the difference between those that commit to the training, those that commit to the understanding that they need to be ready, and those that don't, is that those that don't, fear takes over, and fear drives their decision making.
100%. And I think what people have to understand is that the public see that, right? And more importantly, they feel it. What your community is looking for in a time of crisis, especially, is seeing that a leader's got this, right? You want to be able to convey in all ways that we've got this, we're in charge, we're going to recognize that people in our community may be fearful that this might be a very worrisome time for folks. And by us saying that, by leaders saying that, essentially what you're telling your community is that you understand them. And that's so important. And that's where the prepared messaging comes in. And I think one of the biggest complaints people have is, well, Judy, I can't prepare messaging for every potential thing that's happening. And that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is being prepared to respond when you don't know all the details, when you're in stage two of that crisis of insufficient information. There is a lot you can be saying to make sure that you are maintaining that trust. Telling people what you know for certain is one of the very first things you can do, along with that wiggle room. This is what we know right now to give you that opportunity to change.
Yeah, for sure. I think the hardest part about and why I really wanted, and I'm glad that this is where we're landing in this conversation, is that for a lot of people, this feels like the soft, squishy, touchy, feely stuff. And we started off the conversation talking about trust, right? That at the end of the day, all crisis communication is about trust. It's about maintaining the trust that you've established with your community, holding it through that crisis, and hopefully building on those levels of trust that you have with your community. And if you're not prepared, if you're not understanding what's going on in the emotions of the people that are watching you, in the victims that you talked about, and having that victim-centric communication, this isn't about being touchy-feely. This is about keeping trust, which is vital for any government agency to have.
Yeah, so especially right now, Edelman PR Worldwide with their trust barometer. I mean, trust is as low in government as it has ever been. And then we're not going to do our webinar about this, but AI generated content and imagery is also eroding away at that trust foundation. So trust is the commodity that all government agencies should be building right now, and that's from one-on-one relationships. So building that trust and then coming back to our ability to do that training. Like people, some people like you are obviously just very good to be able to be speakers, but most people, public speaking in a crisis does not come by naturally.
It doesn't, but that's where, we talked about this a couple of minutes ago. Being intentional about saying, actually, this is important. We've seen the other agencies that have gone through this and haven't done it well. We've seen the long-term effects, and when I'm talking with municipal leaders, I talk about at the end of the day, almost all municipal communication ultimately leads to economic development or economic loss in some way, shape, or form. And that might not be what you're thinking about in the crisis itself, but it should be, because if you start to lose, if people start to move out, if people start to not want to buy houses in your community, your tax base decreases. That's public safety funding that goes out the window, right?
Yeah.
So committing to training, committing to doing the hard work of building that probability possibility matrix of things that might happen, building out those top line messages so that you can start to manage the narrative in those first 10 minutes. And the thing, sort of the last thing that I think is important in this process is so often you and I find ourselves in the position of navigating between leaders and legal and who gets to say what. And of course, legal, understandably, is going to say, nope, say nothing, circle the wagons, let's go into we don't comment, right? But we know what the devastating consequences of that can be. Uh, so having that prepared messaging in advance, doing the time to see, is my agency actually ready, allows you to have the conversations with legal long before the crisis unfolds.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Every good leader will tell you this, and Bill Bratton is one of my mentors and one of the smartest men I knew. But he always said, "I don't want both sides of the story. I want a Rubik's cube that I can put together 100 different ways so I can make a good decision." If you're a leader, or if you are a leader, and you're listening primarily to legal counsel, you need to have someone whispering in your other ear saying, "This is the ramifications of saying nothing." But the words that you say
Mm.
are extraordinarily important because you can say all the right words, but still lose public confidence if you say them the wrong way. And that's another big part of our training.
Yeah, I mean, we're just going to circle around the trust wagon again here, because if you say it the wrong way, if you're not thinking about the fact that in a crisis the public isn't processing information in a vacuum, right? They're taking into account how they're feeling. They're taking into account what's actually unfolding. They're already questioning things. We know the first things people think in a crisis is, am I safe? Is my family safe? What do I need to be doing right now in this situation? And they're trying to decide who they can trust on that last one, right? They're going to make an intuitive decision about, am I safe? They're going to make an intuitive decision about, is my family safe? But what do I do? who do I listen to? Who is that trusted source of news and information? They're trying to decide if that's you.
And the biggest problem now, again, I'm going into the my AI market here, is the fact that AI has now created all these news channels that people think are actually bona fide news channels, which are not. They create a bunch of bots or sock puppets to have that news channel have 17 million people that follow it. And then I go on and go, oh, 17 million people trust this as a news channel, so it must be a bona fide news channel. It's actually being run by a malicious actor. So understanding who your stakeholders and the difference between stakeholders and audiences, right? We don't want to cater our messages to mass audiences that are standing back from your event going, oh, good job, good job. We want to focus our messaging on our stakeholders, the people that actually have a stake in what's happening, but we're not going to be believed by those stakeholders. And there's new studies out that talk about people's trust bubbles have become very, very small. And the people who folks trust today are people they've had one-on-one real life interaction with. So this now behooves our organizations to make sure that we prioritize our officers and our professional staff from reaching out and creating one-on-one engagement all the time. Trust becomes number one.
In the reaching out, those one-on-one conversations, those one-on-one interactions, what that's really about is demonstrating that you're living the values that you talk about in your policy procedure, your mission statements, right? I don't even know how many municipal buildings that I've been in where there are, whether it's core values or mission statements that are up on the wall, that are painted on
Vision.
stairs, right,
Yep.
on billboards outside, on the side of cars. That's a whole other conversation for another day. Um, and it's great that those things exist, but if you're not living them, if you're not actually demonstrating to the public that this is what we say, this is what we believe, but it's also how we act in that crisis situation, there's going to be a cognitive disconnect. There's going to be an emotional disconnect. That trust thing that you're talking about, you're not going to have it. And what we've seen across cities, and there are case studies about this. There are beautiful 100-page white paper reports that have been written about this. Is that the inability to start effectively communicating quickly is a major, major contributor to that loss of trust in a crisis. And that's not a communication problem, that's a leadership problem.
100%, right? The longer you wait, the less control you have. And every leader in their heart, I want to be able to have control of this crisis. Absolutely, 100%.
You've talked a little bit in this conversation about mis and disinformation, but particularly AI mis and disinformation, right? And so the challenge that I see is that when you have that leadership failure, when you don't have the people that are on board with the understanding of how quickly you need to get out and start managing that narrative, the ability of misinformation, disinformation, fake videos to totally shift what you're actually dealing with. I mean, down to the point where we've seen misinformation actually translating into real world activity that runs counter to what public safety needs to have happen. We're not talking just about like PR fluff stuff here, or it would be nice to have for your agency. This is real world public safety challenges that are stemming from failing to begin to manage the narrative as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and there's a couple things that I can suggest there is that one, that we talked about living your values, but we also have to be very transparent about that. So having transparency dashboards, all the things that you can do before the crisis happens are extraordinarily important. So letting people know that you are walking the walk and talking the talk, making sure that you actually are doing some kind of social media listening, because what happens is a lot of this misinformation starts online. People aren't calling 911 anymore. People are creating these narratives online. And if you're not aware of it, and especially because these narratives are created oftentimes by AI to create that anger, fear, and divisiveness that go viral, once that gets out of the barn and you're chasing the narrative, you're not going to catch it. And there's so much academia that backs up the fact that that person who delivers that message first has power over the message. I never want to have my agency in a position where we're reacting to what the media or social media are putting out there. I want to make sure we're putting out good information off the top.
I remember uh, about 10 years ago, we were teaching and talking to organizations about it's great that you have a website. Yeah, you want to drive people to your website, but all of the activity, the conversation, it's all taking place on social media, and you got to be on social media and you got to be out there. And we were building entire communication plans around social media engagement. And that worked really, really, really well for about 8 years. And
Yep.
what you just talked about, I think, is one of these readiness, uh, understanding pivot points in crisis communications generally. Is that what we're seeing is there was this rise of website usage and that declined into social media usage. And now we're at this really interesting inflection point where if it's not on your website, if you don't have a crisis preparedness page on your website ready to put up information in real time, as the crisis unfolds, the AI bots that are scrubbing and looking for information that malicious actors are using, that AI itself is using, if it's not on your website, it's not real. And you can put out all the good social media messaging you want, but if you're not doing it in conjunction with active real-time messaging on your website, AI is never going to see it. And that means 80% of people who are now getting their news and information from AI searches are never going to know how you're messaging, how you're responding to the crisis, what people can actually do in real time. It's terrifying if that awareness gap exists because it's going to have real downstream ramifications for communities in crisis.
It 100% is, and I think one of the jobs we have as communicators, as frustrating it is having our finger on the pulse of the changing ecosystem of the media that we're using. So yeah, we have anything you say or do needs to be online or it didn't happen. And those of us in law enforcement, we know if it's not written down in the report, it didn't happen. But it is the same way now because that's where AI is going to go grab that information. Absolutely 100%.
The need for leadership to buy in, the understanding that it can happen, it will happen. It happens in small towns. You know, I say this all the time, like nobody knew where Ferguson, Missouri was until Ferguson happened, right? It's going to happen. The lack of prepared messaging, the lack of training, the knowledge gap that exists in how your community is actually processing information in real time. All of these contributing factors are what really drove the desire, the sincere um, work that we put into developing the 10-minute crisis test because we're seeing the same failures over and over and over again. And they all boil down to three basic points. Can you get something out in the first 10 minutes of that crisis situation? And not just we are aware of the thing that's happening, but like actual targeted ethical information that's diffusing fear and giving people information with what they should be doing. Is that message pre-approved? Is it ready to go? Has it been vetted by legal? Is it well understood so that you're not reliant on one person who might be on a cruise ship in the Bahamas when the crisis happens and now you're scrambling, right? Is the organization prepared institutionally to be able to respond to the crisis? And have your leaders practice? Have you done mock interviews with them? Have you done practice sessions where it's the world's media has descended upon you, or it's the 22-year-old who doesn't want to work in your town anymore and they're going to hit you hard on this thing because they want to turn you into their B-roll for their next audition tape. Are you prepared? That's what really went into forming the 10-minute crisis test.
And what's really cool about having a test like that, we all like holding ourselves against something, and there ain't nothing law enforcement likes better than doing like a test where we can check off boxes. We're all about that. But knowing where you are, and I wish I had one of these earlier in my career, it also helps you figure out where do I need to further develop. So I might have a great messaging strategy, but my operation side of my strategy might be lacking. Maybe I don't have a really great approval process. in place. Maybe I do need to do additional media training for my executives and my principals. So all of that is going to be part of what that key is: speed equals trust. So if you're hesitating here, if you're going to freeze when it matters, by the time you respond, narrative's gone. You're not getting it back, and you're not going to get back the trust either.
So as we did the work of building the test, we've been talking about it for this whole webinar experience, just to give people an understanding of what we're talking about with this 10-minute crisis test. We took the combined experience, the best practices, the DOJ recommendations. We took everything that was out there, put it into a real world, okay, would this survive? What does this actually look like? This took us a few months to actually build. And what the test shows is, do you actually understand your community? And when we're talking about do you understand your community, that's not just a surface level, yeah, my community likes me, but how well do you actually know your community? What are the demographics? What are the values of your community? What are the competing interests? So that when you're building that legitimacy triangle of communication, that you're able to speak to those disparate groups and audiences. Um, we talked about this a little bit before. Do your actions actually match the rhetoric? And are those operationalized? And so diving a little bit below the surface of what's written on policy or paper, but what actually happens on the street. What is the actual crisis response going to look like, and does that marry up with what you have planned and what you have planned to say? And Judy, I'll let you take the last two key points that come out of this because I think they're really important, and I think that you're going to nail them.
Yeah, well, it's the preparation part is the part that's boring. Most of us hate preparing. Most of us hate doing strategy. But again, it's looking at the preparation from, do we have that overarching messaging prepared that we can put that out in those first 10 minutes? Do we have our people prepared, depending on whoever that is, to be able to address that situation? And it could be very different in every situation. I might not be rolling out my chief of police in every crisis. Maybe it's going to be my person who's in charge of patrol. Maybe it's going to be a hostage negotiator. Maybe it's going to be this, that, or the third thing, but that's got to be laid out. And are they well trained? And then lastly, how am I going to communicate? I was a person 5 years ago that was absolutely 100% against having a public safety app. Now I am 180. I am 100% supportive of having a public safety app because people are looking for, where do I go to get trusted information? And if you do an app well, that will serve that. But that's the preparation part of it. And lastly, we have to take a good look at ourselves, and this is sometimes a little painful, of how likely is it that you're not going to be able to get that information out in the first 10 minutes? I was shocked working with the large organizations that I've worked with, um, how long it takes to get information out. Because even though we might have approval processes in place, oh, well, legal counsel is the one on the cruise this time. Or, oh, we've just now the governor wants, to be involved in this thing, so we need governor's legal to approve it. So that the rubric that's there, like to decide, hey, what are the what are the bridges that we have to cross to be able to get out and talk to our community very quickly, is extraordinarily important. And what we have to remember, and I think this is key, that in a crisis, our communities are not just listening, they're deciding whether or not they trust you as you guys move forward through the crisis. That's key.
You know, I think we've said the word trust probably 15, maybe 20 times. I was trying to do a quick recount, um, because it's ultimately the thing that people, um, you remember where you were. You just remember where you were when the bad thing happened, and it never goes away, and it feels like it's the same day. Uh, I hesitate to use this example anymore because I feel like I'm starting to age out of some of the younger generations, but I have distinct memories of the exact moment I found out about Oklahoma City. We all remember where we were on 9/11, right? So the preparedness that we're talking about, being ready for the crisis, it's not just about what you do, It's about how fast and how clearly you can tell people that you're doing it so that you can hold on to that trust. Because in the first 10 minutes, it's not just shaping your response, it's deciding will the public believe you in the days, months, weeks, years after the crisis is over. And I think that's why the work that we put into developing the 10-minute crisis test, the reason we wanted to do this webinar is because we see the high stakes failures that take place, and we never want to see that happen again anywhere. We want to have agencies be as fully prepared as they can be. So um, I'm excited about what this could potentially do for organizations to actually be able to give them that checklist that you were talking about.
Yeah.
And so,
My
go ahead.
Sorry, my one takeaway that I would give to everybody, and it's the famous Simon Sinek why. And the why is this: you're going to be remembered more for how your agency responded to the crisis than the crisis itself. I look at Uvalde. No one remembers that shooter's name, and thankfully they don't. But what do we talk about when we talk about Uvalde? We talk about the failures of law enforcement. And when you go over many, many failures of government, whether it be law enforcement or other, we don't necessarily talk about the crisis. We talk about the response. And that's what we have to keep in mind. And that goes back to the difference between outcomes and outputs. We always want to be focusing on outcomes.
I think that's a perfect way to close this. So, we have some questions, but I just want to thank everybody who's here for taking the time to listen to us talk through this. If you can't tell by the tone of our voice and the passion, this is something that we're really both excited about, but really truly believe in as a value additive to crisis communication and public safety narratives. And we've got some questions about what we talked about, so I'm just going to pull them up and. Uh, I'm laughing inside of my head. It's shocking that in a Zoom recorded webinar where everything goes out to the public that we have anonymous questions, but I'll take anonymous questions.
Absolutely.
Um, so Judy, this first one I'm actually going to throw to you because this has got your name written all over it. The question says, I've tried to warn my leadership team that we need to put together a crisis prep plan. They think it's unnecessary and that we should focus on things that are actually happening. How do you convince people they need to be prepared?
Wow. I would show them examples of agencies that weren't prepared. You don't have to go back very far. Actually, you can go to the Department of Justice Cops Office website and you can look at after action reports from the Pulse nightclub shooting, from Uvalde, from LVMPD and the response to the Harvest Music Festival. Those are just three fairly recent ones. And don't listen to us. Listen to what's come out of these after action reports from extraordinarily smart people that went and did the research that will come back and tell you the agencies that were prepared. And LVMPD does an amazing job. They're prepared. They know how to do this stuff. They I don't imagine that a Tesla blowing up, at a Trump hotel was on their bingo card, but they managed that so well as compared to poor Norlands who had to deal with a ramming attack on the same day. So I think just showing the juxtaposition of a group that's actually prepared with a plan who wasn't, and how even traditional media responded to that, and
Mm,
the vitriol that was
mhm.
created from not just the media, but also from people who live there, your true stakeholders, is a very good example of why you have to be prepared. But the problem is nobody wants to give you time off to actually do the plan. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges you'll have.
The only thing that I would add to that, there's an art and a science to convincing decision makers of the importance of something. And I'm not going to give away all the secret sauce, but what I will say is that if you can find a way to make this concept, everything that we're talking about, personal to the decision maker, show them their personal stake in the success or failure of the plan. And we're not just talking about like, oh, you're going to get fired if you don't do this, but like that long term. I talk about legacy a lot when I'm out on the road because legacy matters, and the legacy that as a chief, as an agency head, that you leave behind matters. And do you want your legacy to be one of this agency was as prepared as humanly possible, or it was my show, my way, the only way? If you can find a way to make it personal, I think that that's also really, really helpful.
Oh, 100%, because I'll be the first one to say, if you're a police leader, if you're a law enforcement leader, there's ego involved, and rightly so. Um, and our job as communicators is to make sure that our bosses look good and are representative of everything our agencies stand for. So 100%.
Next question. Our policy says we don't speak until we have information confirmed. Sorry. Um, don't you run a huge risk of putting out wrong information if you speak too quickly? I love this question so much. I'm going to jump in on this if that's
Oh,
okay,
please do,
Judy, and
because
then
I
I'll
know
toss it to
exactly what
you.
you're going to say, because we share a brain.
Indeed I do. So, um, there's always something that you can say in a crisis. Always, 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 always. And we want you to have prepared messages. We want you to be ready. But the reality is, you can talk about the incident itself that's happening. You can talk about the people that are responding to the incident and what they're doing and what you need the public to do to assist those people. You can talk about the overall mission of the department and how the department is responding to the crisis. And you don't need a whole lot of facts to be able to do that. You're not providing like details about the shooter or what type of handgun was used, right? And very often, understandably, there's a desire to have 100% of the information before you speak, to be able to check every box on the list and say, this is the 100% certainty. That's just not how the public thinks. That's not how the public moves in a crisis situation. And the more work you do on the front end to prepare those messages, to get those messages signed off on, then you'll have that opportunity to put messaging out where you don't need 100% of the facts confirmed, but you can still provide that active, targeted, ethical information to diffuse fear and tell people what you need them to do to be safe.
Yeah, and I will add the one asterisk. You only talk about what you know for a fact. What do you know for a fact and still provide the wiggle room? Way too many law enforcement have gotten caught up, and it happened in Uvalde. We went in right away. Well, half truth. You went in right away and stood around in a hallway for 77 minutes. The teacher propped that door open. No, if your officers would have continued to watch that video, they would have said the teacher did take the rock away from the door, and the door didn't latch and hadn't latched in a while. So this is what will get you in the biz bag. Talking about things that you think happened, talking about things as if, well, that was our policy, that was our training, so of course that's what happened. No, you focus on what you know with the wiggle room. Huge, huge part of the issue.
Yeah, you said something really important that we've got two more questions. And again, if you're watching and you have questions, please, please, please drop them in. We built in some time here for that. The um, I think here there's an area of confusion around talking about what you know and having 100% of the information to talk. Talking about what you know is about talking about what you know in the moment.
Yeah.
What is the factual information that we have at this moment, and doing what Judy said, having that caveat. This is the information that we have right now. It's likely to change as the situation evolves. We will keep you updated, right? Something that simple is the you're still providing the information that you know right now. No, not believe, not speculate, not guess at, not I heard from a person who heard from a person that this is the thing that might be taking place at some imaginary location, the thing that you know. And I say that tongue in cheek for all the PIOs who have had to chase that rabbit hole down many times to get information out. But that's very different than having all of the information and waiting to speak. Speaking about the facts that you know in the moment and having all of the information are two entirely different things. Lots of people wait for this part. You don't need that to be able to start speaking. Are there warning signs that we will not be ready if a crisis happens? Yes. Yes. One, take the 10-minute crisis test. Shameless plug, not going to miss the opportunity. I'll talk about that at the end of this, but I'm not going to miss the opportunity to drop in a shameless plug. But also, If you don't know anything about groupthink, I would encourage you all. There's some really great videos out there that walk through the aspects of groupthink, but there are two phrases that should send off alarm bells that you're not going to be ready. The first phrase is, "Don't worry about that now. We'll deal with it later." If you've ever been in a meeting where that phrase has been used, chances are the "don't worry about that now, we'll deal with it later" thing was the thing that came back to bite you down the line. That's the first real warning sign that you have decision makers who are not considering the full ramification, the full scope of consequences. The second sort of trigger alarm phrase for me is, "That will never happen here." We started at the top talking about that, and that's a big, big warning indicator that your agency isn't prepared because it means you're not taking the time to consider these things.
Yeah. And I'll add one more. Communications is not sitting in the C-suite. Um, the communicator is the one person in that executive command group that is looking at things holistically. Operations is looking at operations, legal is looking at legal, HR, finance. If communications isn't in that room, if you are not seen as that trusted advisor to your chief executive, when something goes bad, you are not going to be the first to know. And I will guarantee you will have great difficulty in managing your crisis if you are not in that room.
Um, we have two more questions with names attached to them, which is really really exciting. I love that. Thank you for
Being
stepping
brave.
into the breach with us. I appreciate that. So this question: How do you convince social media influencers who are also media practitioners in other organizations, pausing, whom you have to work with that in a crisis is not about likes or a hurricane message from the governor? I love this question so much. I'm going to read it again. Sorry, I started to. How do you convince social media influencers who are also media practitioners in other organizations whom you have to work with that a crisis is not about likes or a hurricane message from the governor?
So let me just say a couple little things here. Um, One of them, honestly, is the relationships you develop with these folks and making them realize that they can be a part of rebuilding a community or tearing a community down. Now is not the time to monetize. But on the other hand, so many of the social media citizen journalists are doing this stuff to monetize, to make money. I mean, I got to put food on the table, so I'm going to monetize this and blow it up as much as I can. Guess who wins there? The monetization, as opposed to the goodwill. So I'm always going to try to reach out to play off the goodwill of my folks. But I also think that calling these people out is an important thing that you can do. Now, you have to have leadership that has gonads to do that, but I am one of those folks that will call out people for doing exactly that. Because when people in your community realize someone is doing something for clicks to take advantage of possibly someone's worst day in their lives to monetize and make money for an advertiser, it turns people off. So I'm going to warn the media that I'm going to do that, my social media folks that you're talking about. But I am going to take action because I think long gone are the days where the tail is wagging the dog here. We have the ability, as long as we're polite and professional about it, to take those folks on. And that's probably why I'm not a PIO anymore.
So the only thing that I will add to this, because this is a personal pet peeve, and NIOA was kind enough to give me an entire day to talk about it a couple of years ago. If this is happening from agency practitioners as well, if this is happening from PIOs in partnering organizations that you need to work with, you need to have a um, real conversation with them. I tend to be a little blunt at times, and this is one of those times
Yeah.
where I get, yeah, shocking. This is one of those times where I get real blunt. Um, if you are more interested in generating likes or clicks to grow either your personal brand or your agency's brand in a crisis situation, than actually providing information to people who are scared, who are fearful, who are worried about the safety of their children, um, then you don't belong in that seat. full stop. And sometimes it takes really tough conversations with people. And maybe it's just opening their eyes and maybe showing them that, like, listen, the responsibility of the PIO in any organization isn't about self-promotion. And it's very rarely about fluff stories for the department itself. It's about building real relationships of trust. It's about building real conduits of information for people who need to know what's actually taking place. There's an aspect of that that is helpful in the crime fight if you're a law enforcement agency. There's an aspect of that that's helpful in the budget fight for other public safety organizations. But at the end of the day, in a crisis situation, the most important concern that you can have is, am I doing everything that I can to protect the first responders and the people that they're responding to with the messaging and the information that I'm providing? That's got to be the overriding focus. And if it's not, it's time for a tough conversation.
Yeah, and honestly, I think one thing we have to keep in mind from a PIO perspective with a lot of the fluff stuff that we do, and I get it, we want to put some humanity behind the badge, but I think we always have to remember that at some point, your agency, your chief, you as the PIO might end up being a narrator of trauma. And that trust has to be already established. And I think that's really important. And I didn't read the paper about being a narrator of trauma till actually last year. And if I would have known that earlier in my career, I think I would have set things differently during my time as a PIO. So I think that's something we have to keep in the back of our minds.
That's a great point. Thank you. Thank you for adding that. Our last question, another one that I really like a lot. My PIOs and public communication safety professional ask such good questions. My comms office gets good messaging put together accurately and timely. However, I work for a public body that is often targeted by DOJ and DOE, so legal has to weigh in, and their review takes too long and waters down the message to the degree that it's no longer a point in sending it. How do I convince leadership that this is not a viable practice while being respectful of all of the lawyers with a smiley face, which I really appreciate. Um, Judy, you want to take this one first, and then I'll wrap it.
Yeah, I'll just quickly respond. I think part of it goes back to the preparation process. So one of the things that we did in New York City when we prepared our crisis plan was here's our crisis plan, here's our crisis messaging, and we took it through legal for to get all the approvals done. And the approvals were done on what Bill Bratton calls like the Christmas tree. We applied the different balls and lights and tinsel. But as long as legal was okay with the bare bones of it, that's what we went by. And I hate to say that I'm one of those people that is, more sometimes when it comes to legal, ask for forgiveness instead of approval sometimes. I get it. I get the covering the butt. I think, but what we have to convey to our leadership is the fact that if we come out in three things that victims want, right? They want an explanation of what happens. They want to know that this will never happen again, and they want an apology. And legal goes, we can't give them an apology with their hair lit on fire. But there are studies out there that talk about if we are human beings and we say, this is a horrible thing. We're sorry. Some of this was on us. This is what we're going to do moving forward. That goes a long way in limiting how much money and how many lawsuits and everything. So they have the information and we can respect what they're trying to do to protect the agency, but that's exactly what communications is trying to do as well. The best advice I can get is to have those conversations beforehand, before the crisis breaks, have those sit down conversations with legal because it's a challenge. Biggest fights I've ever had in my career.
Yeah. So as a communications professional, I never miss the opportunity for shameless plugs. I co-authored a peer-reviewed law article that's getting published at the end of this month about communications professionals and lawyers working together and ways to do that effectively. So it's fun for us to bash legal a little bit because sometimes that's just good stress relief. If you can sit down with your legal folks and get an understanding of their concerns, what are they looking at? And chances are they're looking at either risk mitigation or they're looking at potential civil rights violation lawsuits, anything along those lines, right? And that's good. We want them to be thinking about those things. That's how good policy gets written. But if you can sit down and build that relationship with them and then thread the through lines for them, talk to them about that all messaging is jury pool education, that every time you speak, you're informing the very jury pool that they are worried about siding against them. And the more trust that you build in there, the more helpful that is. If you can show them how your messaging is designed and targeted in a way that speaks to their concerns, but also speaks to the community's concerns, and get them to see that you're thinking about risk mitigation as part of what you're doing. And that's what all communicators are doing, right? We're thinking about the risks, we're thinking about all of the potential challenges that we face. If you can have those conversations with them, that tends to be very, very helpful. But at the end of the day, this ultimately is a leadership decision. And the moment that I was probably the most proud of Tony Batts when I worked for him when I was his PIO was the first national news conference that we did the day after Freddie Gray died. And the city solicitor told him, whatever you do, do not take responsibility and do not apologize. And he went, oh, okay. And walked up to the podium, and the first words out of his mouth were, we are responsible for the death of Freddie Gray, and I apologize to his family. Now, legal completely lost their minds, but it was the exact message that the city, the community, the family needed to hear. And so sometimes it's a leadership decision where legal counsel is counsel. It's not an edict, it's not a mandate. Communications counsel is counsel. It's not an edict, it's not a mandate. So you've got to find that way of having leadership understand that they're getting counsel from multiple sources and that they need to make the decision that's in the best interest of the organization for the community. And sometimes that means going against legal advice, and that just is what it is. Um, you can't risk losing the public's trust to win a lawsuit because the long-term ramifications are going to be worse. Could you send a link to that article? As soon as it gets published, you will absolutely follow Connection Point on LinkedIn. I promise you, as a shameless self-promoter, I will absolutely make certain that that article is fully findable for everyone that's watching right now. One more question that just popped in. I've explained that there are certain things I won't do on social media, and joining the current trend on TikTok is one of them. I also try to speak in the tone of my agency. Is there anything wrong with this position, Judy?
Quick answer, because it's almost 2 o'clock. No, keep on doing what you're doing.
1000%. 1000%. The there was a time. This is what we were talking about, and I will say this in 15 seconds or less. There was a time when joining trends was a big thing. My agency did it. Lots of agencies were doing it. What we're seeing 8, 9 years down the line is that that's a bad thing to do. You've got to reflect the values, the trust of your organization. The latest TikTok trend is not going to be the thing. It's not going to build you the trust that people thought it was going to build you 15 years ago when this all started. Keep doing what you're doing. And it's not just your opinion. There is an entire book that's available on the Department of Justice Cops Office website that talks about strategic communication for law enforcement executives, of which Judy Powell might be the author, that talks about these very things. So getting that book is going to be very helpful for you. It's free. You can download it. It's in a PDF. As we wrap up in this last minute, if you are at all interested in the 10-minute crisis test, there's a QR code on the screen right now that will take you to a link where you can book it. We will do a free 10-minute crisis test for everybody who joined here today. You can get an understanding of where your agency rates. It's a weighted rubric, so you'll get a score. We'll tell you what that score means. Um, please take advantage of that opportunity. The QR code is there. Again, you're going to get a survey. We want to do more of these. We're going to continue to do more of these. We want to make them as beneficial for everybody that's participating as possible. So please take a minute to fill out that survey for us. We would greatly appreciate it. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank Judy for taking time out of her day to join in this conversation. So Judy, thank you for being here with me to do this.
Always a pleasure, and thank you for everyone who's watching for your time and also for everything that you do. Our jobs as communicators are more important today than they've ever been. So thank you for your commitment.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you all so very much. We'll see you at the next one.